All right, guys, today we were in Mark chapter 5. There's 43 verses in this chapter, but half of it is one singular story. So I think it will be something we'll get through in one video. We'll be covering the story, famous story really, of the demoniac, or a man possessed with many demons. And then also in this, there will be some healings that are very interesting. And we have some things to learn about healing and faith and Jesus' teaching concerning a woman and a little girl. So without further ado, let's jump into these first 20 verses that speak of the demoniac. Now, before we get into this, I just want to say I'm going to point you to a few passages. I'm going to point you to the apocryphal book of Enoch, some very important section of that. I'm going to read from that. And I just want to say up front, in case I forget, however you land on that issue, let's not divide over this. Let's be friendly over this. I'm just trying to serve you. Maybe you've never heard of the book of Enoch. Maybe you have no clue about it. And it's just one opinion out of really three that you can choose for, three or four really views you could maybe choose on the origin of demons and where they come from. But I just want to mention one, the one that I hold, and I think I see clearly represented in the text more and more. The more research I do, the more books I read on demonology, the more I see the support of these different things. Not only in things like the book of Enoch, which we'll reference, but also right there in multiple passages in the New Testament. So Jesus has just calmed the sea and the storm. He has commanded to the winds and the waves that they should obey him and be calm. And as we covered some maybe possible prophetic things going on there in the Psalms, but nonetheless, Jesus is commanding the storms. As we covered that, they are finishing this voyage to, short voyage, to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And that's where we pick up here in verse 1 with Jesus and his disciples as they're arriving to the region of the Gerasenes. So chapter 5, verse 1, so they came to the other side of the lake, the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Gerasenes. I'll quickly mention, there is a slight discrepancy in the text here. The other synoptic gospels, Matthew and Luke, reference this as a slightly different name, and that may be attributed to just the varying names that they called it. It's not a big deal. It's easy to see the resemblance there, so I wouldn't worry about that. But verse 2 says, just as Jesus was getting out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came from the tombs and met him. So two things that I want you to notice here. The first thing is that the very second Jesus is getting out of there, there's this guy running up to him, coming to meet them, waiting on the shore of them. And what a scary, warm welcome, to say the least. And again, we already spoke of in previous videos, unclean spirit is a reference to Levitical law of mixing of two types, namely that of angels and humans. So that's why the most occurring description, I believe, in the New Testament, which is a fact, the most occurring reference for a demon in the New Testament is that of unclean spirit. And I think it speaks to that mixture of angel and human being, the divine offspring, the giants, which then form the spirits of the Nephilim. And I'll quote a passage from Enoch. We'll look at this together. I just wanted to read this to you. Let's see, chapter 15. I just wanted to read this part, so bear with me. See if I can make this bigger in case you'd like to read along. This is from book 1 of Enoch, first Enoch, or just Enoch, however, it depends. But this is for 15 and the first 4 verses in 16. I'm going to give you some context here. And he answered and said to me, an angel, presumably to Enoch here, according to this. And he answered and said to me, and I heard his voice, fear not, Enoch, thou righteous man and scribe of righteousness. Approach hither and hear my voice, and go say to the watchers of heaven, this would be the angelic beings who sinned. Go say to the watchers of heaven, are at once stewarded with overseeing the earth. who have sent thee to intercede, sorry for the Old English, for them, or to pray or minister on their behalf. You should intercede for men and not men for you. So he's saying that the angels are supposed to be carrying messages from humans to God, as is the biblical story, not from men aren't supposed to be the ones taking messages from angels to God. So everything's all mismatched here. You should intercede for men and not men for you. Whether have ye left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken to yourselves wives? This is the Jewish traditional interpretation of Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4. Angels lying with women and sinning in that way. This is repeated in the New Testament in Jude verse 6 and 7. This sin is mentioned again in the New Testament. So this is not just in Enoch, this is in your New Testament as well. Also, this is referenced, part of this book in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, as these angels being in Tartarus, as Peter says. So verse 3, whether you have ye left the high, holy, and eternal heaven, and lain with women, and defiled yourselves with the daughters of men, and taken to yourselves wives, and done like the children of earth, and begotten giants as your sons, and though you were holy, spiritual, living the eternal life, you have defiled yourselves with the blood of women, and have begotten children with the blood of flesh, as the children of men lusted after flesh and blood, as those also do die and perish. Therefore I have given them wives, so that they may impregnate them and beget children by them, that thus nothing might be wanting to them on earth. But you were formerly spiritual, living the eternal life, and immortal for all generations of the world. And therefore I have not appointed wives for you, for as for the spiritual ones of heaven. And the reason I'm caricaturing this is because Matthew's teaching concerning Jesus, he says that people in the afterlife will be like angels in heaven that neither marry nor are given in marriage. But here we see this caricature with Enoch and with the rest of the New Testament, is that not all of the angels stayed in their proper dwelling. Some of them left their proper dwelling, to quote Jude, like these watchers that sinned. And therefore have not appointed wives for you, for as for the spiritual ones of the heaven, in heaven is their dwelling. And now the giants, who are produced from the spirits and the flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Evil spirits have proceeded from their bodies, because they are born from men, and from the holy watchers is their beginning and primal origin. So there it is, the origin of demons. The mixing of flesh and spirit, angel and human. And this is interesting. It says, they shall be called evil spirits on earth, and evil spirits shall they be called. As for the spirits of heaven, in heaven shall be their dwelling. But as for the spirits of the earth, which were born upon the earth shall be their dwelling. And the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. From the days of, this is chapter 16, verse 1, from the days of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, from the souls of whose flesh and spirits, having gone forth, shall destroy without incurring judgment. Thus shall they destroy until the day of consummation. I want you to remember that. So basically they're saying that when these dead Nephilim, these dead giants, when they die, their spirits will remain on earth. They're a product of this abominable thing of humans and angels mixing. And so humans are to be on earth. God has designated afterlife for them. Likewise, he does for angels. We see this in 2 Peter, and also in Jesus' teaching of where angels go when they die. Like I said, Peter talks about them being locked up after they sinned. But as for this abominable interbreed, they're places on earth where they were created, according to the book of Enoch, to destroy and corrupt the earth and cause problems until the day of judgment. So this is all from the book of Enoch. We don't get it anywhere else. And this is important for you to know, because your New Testament reflects putting stock in this worldview, in this opinion. And if you don't get this from Enoch, there's not really another place you get it, but we see it reflected in the New Testament. Shall destroy without incurring judgment, thus shall they destroy until the day of consummation. So evil spirits are given the freedom to roam until the end of time, until the great judgment, in which the age shall be consummated, the end of the age, the last judgment, the great white throne judgment. Over the watchers and the godless, yea, shall be wholly consummated. And now as to the watchers who have sent thee to intercede for them, and who have been aforetime in heaven, say to them, you have been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women. That was part of the Genesis 6 worldview of the Jews, that these angels helped reveal countless mysteries and knowledges, forbidden secrets and knowledges to the human race, and that's how they progressed in civilization so fast, and that's how they also discovered evil so fast. And so God, according to Enoch, accounted them partially responsible for the amount of wickedness that was widespread on the earth. We see this when the transition from Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through 4, then transitions to verse 5, where it says, evil was so widespread across the whole earth that all that people thought all the time was evil continually. So that's where this transition is. These watchers, these divine beings have passed on information, countless knowledge and forbidden information to human beings, like how to craft war, how to be seductive, how to do astronomy, all kinds of things like that, how to create potions, all kinds of stuff like that. You've been in heaven, but all the mysteries had not yet been revealed to you, and you knew worthless ones, and these in the hardness of your hearts you have made known to the women, and through these mysteries women and men work much evil on the earth, as we just talked about and I explained. Say to them, therefore, you have no peace. So we'll stop right there. I just wanted to reference that. So see the context here for verse 2, as Jesus was getting out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit. That's the Jewish worldview here. This unclean spirit is this mixture, came from the tombs and met him. So like I said, you don't have to believe as I do. You don't have to see it that way. That's totally fine. This is an essential issue, but this is, to me, very clear in the text. And we'll see it's continually clear in the other New Testament passages. And there's a whole lot of this biblical worldview you've got to really dump out if you hold some other view, which is totally fine, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'm just telling you what I think is here. So verse 3, he says, he lived among the tombs, speaking of this man. The other thing I wanted to mention about verse 2, as I did say there was two things. The other is that in the other synoptic gospel is that there's actually two men recorded, I believe in the synoptic gospel of Matthew, and Luke only records one demoniac. Mark here records one demoniac, and Luke records two. But what I want you to notice, there's not a discrepancy in the sense that Mark and Luke only say there's only one demoniac. It just says there's this guy that shows up first of all, and in Matthew or Luke, I can't remember which one, I believe it's Matthew, that has the double demoniac. In that one, it just references two. So it seems like what's going on here is that there was two in some way, shape, or form, but this one guy was prominent as far as demonization goes. So he lives among the tombs, kind of strange. And I'll go on to say, no one could bind him anymore. This usually isn't a good sign. Not even with a chain. Verse 4, for his hands and feet had often been bound with chains and shackles, but he had torn the chains apart and broken the shackles in pieces. No one was strong enough to subdue him. So this is clearly, if we ever do a series on demonology, I'll talk about this, but there's certain things that are common to mental illness, and there's certain things that you just can't explain other than demonic oppression. And so being able to break metal chains and shackles, and for groups of people to not be able to subdue you, that's a good mark of demon possession, in case you're wondering. This is inhumane. No human can just break shackles and metal like this. Maybe for the most strongest men on planet Earth, maybe that's a possibility, but even then, I'm not sure. But for this man, it seems like it's just no feat, and he would just break these metal chains. And you got to think they weren't tiny chains if they're trying to subdue him. So this is pretty scary, quite frankly. No one strong enough to subdue him. Each night and every day, among the tombs and in the mountains, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. So you have this picture of this crazy man who dwells apart from civilization in tombs, right? In caves, if you will, in the mountains, isolated. He's cast out from the population. And even at times when people have tried to tie him up with metal shackles and chains, he breaks them. And so this is something that someone no one can control, and probably someone everyone fears and keeps their safe distance from. Each night and every day, it says, so this was his whole life of just wandering, miserable, cutting himself, and just in misery, crying out. I mean, it's just a really miserable, bleak picture. Verse 6 says, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran, so he comes out after him, and bowed down before him. And then he cried out with a loud voice, verse 7, leave me alone, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. I implore you by God, do not torment me. So a couple things. He comes up to bow in reverence. That's not insignificant. Next, he begs Jesus to leave him alone. And he says, I implore you by God. So he's calling God as almost like a prayer request. He asks him to leave him alone, to not torment him, which I found really interesting. In Matthew, I wanted to point you out to this parallel of this same story where it says, they cried out, Son of God, leave us alone. This is the same story. Have you come here to torment us before the time? Again, so the demons here are recognizing in the book of Matthew this appointed time in which judgment was to come. We don't find this as clearly in the Old Testament. Another kind of reference to Enoch. I think we do have maybe a reference in Daniel, but it's more of a stretch. It's really a lot more clear in Enoch. But anyways, I just wanted to point that out. They know that there's this appointed time of judgment. Like I said, this seems to be well established from Enoch. And then they're asking Jesus to not do anything ahead of its time. They're hoping they have more time before Jesus does what he's going to do by tormenting them and casting them into the lake of fire. And so they beg him, have you come to torment us before the time, right? So that's what they're most concerned about here, is that their time is run short, even though it's not the end of the age. So I just want to point you to that since we're in Enoch earlier. So he says, they say, do not torment me, for Jesus had said to him, come out of that man, you unclean spirit. Verse 9, it says, Jesus asked him, what is your name? And he said, my name is Legion, for we are many. This is one of the clear passages we have of multiple demonic possession. Another person that's a very prominent figure in New Testament theology that is possessed by multiple demons is Mary Magdalene, which I believe she had seven demons. And here, we're not told the exact number. We are told that it's multiple demons, and we're told that it's legion. Roman legions could be anywhere from, say, 6,000 down to maybe 3,000 soldiers. So we get this picture, while we're not told with the definitive detail, that there is hordes and hordes of demons living inside of this poor man. We're not told how he got all these demons. We're not told the reasons behind this. We're not told if part of it was his fault, or we're not given any of that information, which would be helpful, but we're not. We're just told this story of this severely oppressed man who has possibly thousands of demons living inside of him, which would explain the supernatural, superhero-like strength and the complete misery, isolation, and torment that he was in. And so the demons respond by saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. And it says he begged Jesus repeatedly not to send them out of the region. So they asked Jesus to keep him there in that area, which had been around the Decapolis, these 10 towns. And so it says there on a hillside, verse 11, a great herd of pigs was feeding. So they begged Jesus that they know he's going to cast them out, and he's already told them to come out of him. And so now the negotiation has moved to, okay, you're not going to torment us. Okay, you're going to make us leave. Well, at least let us stay around in the area. And so it seems like maybe he granted their request here. That's what I'm tending to lean towards. And it says that on this hillside, it's almost, you can picture Jesus talking to this man, and he sees this herd of pigs, but they're feeding. And it says, and the demonic spirits begged him, send us into the pigs, let us enter them. So they're having to leave, but they're still kind of negotiating. Please send us to the pigs. Jesus gave them permission. And so the unclean spirits came out and went into the pigs. Then the herd rushed down the steep slope into the lake, the Sea of Galilee, and about 2,000 were drowned in the lake. So, a couple things. First, we see Jesus grants their request. Their request is to go into pigs. And there's a couple things we can learn from this passage, at least. So, the first is that Jesus grants the request of this legion of demons. The second thing that we see here is that after Jesus gives him, the legion permission, the unclean spirits are looking for, and I would just point you back to Enoch, they're looking for a body to inhabit. Angels are spirit beings that can manifest physically in form, whereas human beings are always in form unless we die, until we're in the intermediate state before the resurrection. But as far as the demonic spirits, they are spirit beings that long to be in a home of a body. That's what they desire. That's what the New Testament teaches. Matter of fact, if a demon is cast out, Jesus tells us, and it comes back after it's been wandering around miserably, and it finds this place or this person clean and swept but empty, it invites 7 others worse than him to enter in. So we know that demons wander. We know that they long for a body to indwell, and we know that that's where they want to be, and so that's why they ask to go into these pigs. It seems almost like a retreat. This is a challenging passage because they ask to go in the pigs, and then as soon as they get to the pigs, they run off the cliff and they all kill themselves. So it seems like they were allowed to immediately go into these pigs, and then maybe are set loose upon that region. Maybe, I don't know. The text doesn't tell us. But that's what we're told. Jesus permits them to do as they ask, which is to go into these pigs. And then as soon as they're in these pigs, they go off and kill themselves. And the pigs with them. So the second thing I want you to notice, it says there was about 2,000 pigs here drowned in the lake. So Mark gives us some specific information. So that's at least 2,000 demons. I would lend to believe 2,000 pigs. If you think at least one demon per pig, possibly, who's to say there wasn't multiple demons per pig? I don't know. But it seems like there's at least 2,000 demons. That is insane. This is just such an insane, crazy story. Like I said, the other multiple possession story I can think of is Mary Magdalene with 7 demons, but seems to be no limit as to how many demons can be present within one person. And so this is just a crazy, crazy story. So there's 2,000 pigs that are all killed and drowned in the lake. So the other thing I want you to notice here, not just the volume of demons, not just the interaction that goes on between Jesus and the demons that we can learn theologically from, but also what I want you to see is the value of a human being. Jesus here, maybe contrary to, forgive me, my vegans or my animal lovers, Jesus values a single human person at least above and beyond 2,000 pigs, which is not insignificant. And so, not to say that treatment of animals isn't important to God, or that It's not valuable to him, but we do see clearly that human beings, as is taught throughout the entire Bible, from Genesis in the mandate in the beginning all the way through the entire New Testament, is that humans are given this authority over all created things, and they are prized the crown of creation, the apple of God's eye. And so they are eminently more valuable and precious than even 1,000 or 2,000 pigs. And so I just wanted to mention that sometimes in our worship of the world, our worship of trees, our worship of animals, we can get this weird idea that we're equal to animals, as is taught from the evolutionary worldview. And the Bible is completely contrary to that idea from cover to cover. And so animals are meant to be cherished, to be well taken care of, to never be mistreated, but they are not more valuable than human beings. And so that's the clear teaching of the text. And we see this, Jesus really affirming this, and his just nonchalant attitude to cast all these demons into pigs and have them all killed. He would do that sooner than he would neglect this one man's quality of life. So I think that's important. And to as well defeat demons as he wages this spiritual warfare, which is not insignificant either. So verse 14, we're told in chapter 5 of Mark, it says, now the herdsmen ran off. So you can imagine they're all watching this as they're tending to their pigs. And of course we can assume they're all Gentiles because this is a herd of pigs. Now the herdsmen ran off and spread the news in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed, or demonized man is probably a better translation, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the one who had the legion, and they were afraid. So as soon as the herdsmen see all of their way of life, their living, go kill itself in the Sea of Galilee, they take off to spread the news to the whole town. As soon as the whole town is showing up to come and see what in the world has just happened, as Jesus and his disciples are with the crazy guy, and all their pigs are dead, they find that the man is clothed, which seems like he'd been running around naked, and he's in his right mind. He's no longer possessed. He's no longer demonized. He's no longer under the power of evil spirits. He can think in his own mind, which is radically different from his everyday life. The one who had the legion, they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demon-possessed man reported it, and they also told about the pig. So, of course, there were these herdsmen that had witnessed this entire event, and they just are telling everyone this crazy story of how all these pigs died, 2,000 at least. Then they asked Jesus to leave their region. We're not told exactly why, but we can infer, one, they may be absolutely terrified of Jesus because this one man that they've physically and personally tried to bind with metal chains and shackles that they could not subdue. They now see that Jesus, without even seemingly laying hands on him, without even having to hold him down or anything, liberates this man. So Jesus is seen to be a man of great power, and they could have been very terrified of him, maybe rightly so. Also, he has most likely just done away with their means of living for at least some of the herdsmen, so you can guess that they're very angry with him, and they don't want him around. It just tells us that they asked Jesus to leave their region, so he's not welcome. And I think that's an important transition to these next few verses. Verse 18 says, as he was getting into the boat, he's leaving immediately after this episode, the man who had been demon-possessed asked if he could go with him. So we see this, what you can better believe is a heartfelt, sincere desire to follow Jesus. You can imagine if you were that man, how much suffering your life had been for however long it was, could have been many years of suffering and torment, and to be instantly freed from all of that. You can imagine the compassion and love he would have for his Savior. And while Jesus is being kicked out, he's begging to go with him. He wants to be a disciple. And it says in verse 19, but Jesus did not permit him to do so. Instead, he said to him, go to your home and to your people and tell them what the Lord has done for you. that he had mercy on you. And so Jesus commissions him as a missionary, quite frankly. He sends him back. He says, let me go with you. And Jesus says, no, I want you to stay here, because Jesus isn't welcome, but this man is welcome. He's one of them. And they're not trying to kick this man out, although they are trying to kick Jesus out. And so this man can be a witness to the gospel. He can be a witness to the Messiah. He can be a witness to Jesus' saving power. And that's what he tells them to do. Tell them what the Lord has done for you. And so he wants him to be a testimony to the people, a missionary, so that they can too be saved after they hopefully put their faith and trust in Jesus themselves, based on his testimony, because they all knew who he was and where he had been, and then they could come to see what Christ did for him. So it says, verse 20, so he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis what Jesus had done for him, and all were amazed. So he goes back to the Decapolis, or these 10 towns, and is telling the story, and you better believe they know who he is, and because they were terrified of him before, and now they see him clothed in his right mind, and he's just this amazing, amazing testimony of a changed life. And it says they're all amazed, because how could you not be? I had the opportunity of actually seeing part of the archaeological remains of this site. I just wanted to show you a quick picture. This is Beit Shean. This is one of the 10 towns that would have been where this event took place. And just wanted to show you this picture. This is me standing on kind of a mountaintop overlooking maybe a central road, along with back here in this section was almost like a steam room type place, and some various things in the city. And this is kind of a closer up of the bathhouse that I mentioned that they would heat up, and also a cold water pool that was right beside there, back when they were doing some hot and cold water therapy back in the day. And this is just a few more pictures. Just wanted to show that. It's a cool little place. That's still pretty well preserved to be as old as it is. So he goes back into these 10 towns and is really preaching the gospel. He's speaking of what Christ has done for him. So verse 21 picks up with this next story. It says, when Jesus had crossed again in a boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, as is customary in Jesus' ministry, and he was by the sea. So he goes back to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds are there, swarming him. Verse 22, it says, then one of the synagogue rulers named Jarius came up, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. So a synagogue ruler, it seems like he could have been a type of an elder or someone who helped oversee the synagogue in that area, and he's one of them. And so he sees Jesus. He has a good response. He comes and falls at his feet. So this is a good sign of faith and a good response to Jesus showing up. And it says he asked him urgently, verse 23, my little daughter is near death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be healed and live. So he has a daughter, we find out, that is in critical condition, and he is begging him and has faith that Jesus can heal her. He says, lay your hands so that she can be healed. He has faith in Jesus that he can do what he's been doing, and there's not unbelief. So this is a good sign. Verse 24, it says, Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed and pressed around him. As we noted earlier in these previous chapters, preceding chapters of Mark, people want to touch Jesus. When they touch him, power comes out. When they touch in faith. And so people swarm around him. They crowd around him. He has to be cognizant of this throughout his ministry, often preaching from the boat while people wait on the shore so that he can preach the gospel, which is his primary task, without being interrupted with people grabbing and pressing in all over him. And so as he's walking within the town, he does not have the safety of his boat. He is subject to the crowd. So people are all over him, driving him crazy, I'm sure, and the disciples as well, who are probably trying to act like bodyguards to protect him, if I had to guess. Verse 25, it says, now a woman was there who had been suffering from a hemorrhage or continual bleeding for 12 years. She had endured a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. So as Jesus lands on the shore and this man comes up and he's going to this man's daughter's house to heal his daughter, we're told the story of a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years straight. And it says that she endured a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all she had. So we get some backstory. During these 12 years, she's spent all the money she has trying all kinds of various treatments and procedures to fix this. Where it says she endured a great deal under the care of many doctors. So you can imagine they've tried different procedures or surgeries. They've tried different treatments, and it's not been without her having to pay. And she's out of money. And matter of fact, she's not gotten better from all the doctor's treatments. She's gotten worse because the doctors can't help her. And so this woman is desperate, a desperate woman, a woman who has no more money left and whose health is continuing to deteriorate. Verse 27 says that when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she kept saying, quote, "If only I touch his clothes, I will be healed." So this woman has a deep faith. She has a deep need and deep suffering. And she has this faith that if she can only touch his clothes, if she can just grab his tassel or grab his garments, that'll be enough to heal her because Jesus is so powerful. And it says that in verse 29, at once the bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So she gets a hold of his clothes, and as the crowd's pressing in, she's one of these hands that can grab his clothes, his garments. And the bleeding stops. She feels the healing take place in her body, and she's healed. In a moment, Jesus doesn't have to say anything, doesn't have to do anything. She just grabs out, reaches out to him in faith. It says in verse 30, Jesus knew at once that the power had gone out of him. That's just a funny verse. Jesus is just trying to push his way through the crowd, and he feels as one person with a deep need grabs hold of him, the power goes out to heal her. It says he turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" He's trying to figure out what's just taken place, trying to figure out who had grabbed his clothes and who had just been healed. Because obviously it was significant enough of a disease and done in faith that he felt power go out. It says, verse 31, his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing against you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" They're basically frustrated with Jesus, saying, "Jesus, people are dogpiling you basically right now in the middle of the streets. We're probably trying to protect you is what's going on." And he's like, "Why are you asking who touched you? Everyone's touching you right now." And just to paraphrase a little context. So they're like, you see the crowd pressing against you and you say, "Who touched me?" It's just funny. Verse 32, but he looked around to see who had done it. Then the woman, with fear and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the truth. So this woman, in response to her healing, comes down and falls down before him. Maybe she dropped to her knees or is prostrate in some kind of worship or praise. And she tells her story. She tells him the whole truth. She tells him her experience. She tells him what he had just done for her. And it says in verse 34, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." And so we see as various parts of the New Testament that faith is an important component to healing. Not to say that whenever we have faith we'll be healed, or that if we don't have, or that if we're not healed it's a sign that we don't have faith. Not to say that, but we do see that in certain parts of towns or places where people are unrepentant, they're unbelieving, they're without faith, Jesus is clear not to do many miracles or to heal many people. And likewise, we see when people approach Jesus in faith during his ministry on the earth, he responds in like manner to the amount of faith that they have. And so Jesus people reap what they sow in regard to their faith in Christ. So he says, daughter, your faith has made you well. She came to him in faith, and she received that reward. The same is true for us. If we come to Jesus in faith, he gives us that reward, that rebirth, that new life that he can offer us today. So he tells her to go in peace and to be healed of her disease. Verse 35, it says, while he was still speaking, so right after he's probably finished maybe a little bit of teaching or dealing with this situation with this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years, while he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue ruler's house, the man that had originally approached him that they were on the journey to, saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer? So they basically show up and they tell them, hey, it's too late. Leave Jesus alone to do his ministry. There's no more hope for her. She's dead. The window of opportunity is gone. It's too late. But Jesus, verse 36, paying no attention to what was said, told the synagogue ruler, do not be afraid, just believe. So you can picture this scene. Jesus is finishing teaching. This group of people comes to tell the synagogue ruler the bad news. Hey, it's too late. Your daughter has died. And you can almost imagine Jesus immediately turning on him to lock focus and say, no, eyes on me. Just believe. I love it. Do not be afraid, just believe. Verse 37, he did not let anyone follow him. This is interesting. Except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. This is Jesus' inner circle. We see this repeatedly throughout the Gospels. Jesus has the 12, but he has an inner 3 that see more, that get to do more, that get to receive more teaching, and that get to witness certain things that the others don't. So he does not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John. So we see some favoritism. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. There is no favoritism with God, but we do see that Jesus does seem to have favorites in a sense that we can almost infer that Peter, James, and John are more settled in their heart of who Jesus is and their commitment to him. We can almost see that their faith is greater, and so they receive greater blessing within that ministry. So Peter, James, and John are brought into this next scene. They're the only ones allowed to follow, seemingly into the house. They come to the house of the synagogue where he saw noisy confusion and people weeping and wailing loudly. This young little girl has just died, and there's a scene fitting to the event. Verse 39 says, when he entered, he said to them, why are you distressed and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep. And you can imagine for normal human beings, the confusion with Jesus. Jesus says, hey, what's the big deal? She's asleep. But little do they know, he's God in the flesh coming to their house. And it's the biggest day of their life. And they began making fun of him. Notice this verse. God comes to earth and we didn't recognize him, as the prophet Isaiah says in chapter 53. He was not of any form that we would recognize him. He wasn't anything special. He was just a normal looking guy. He knew what sickness and ailment was. And we regarded him as stricken, cut off by God. But he bore our sins and our transgressions. By his stripes we're healed. I love that prophecy, but they don't recognize him. They actually begin to make fun of him. Okay? But he put them all outside. I love it. Kicks everybody out. And he took the child's father and mother and his own companions and went into the room where the child was. So these three, Peter, James, and John, and the parents of the daughter are all brought into this room to witness the healing of this little girl. Everyone else in the house, as you can imagine, there were many, many people there, are all kicked out. Verse 41, then taking the child by the hand, you can imagine her dead, lifeless body, he said to her, Talitha Koum, I hope I pronounced that right, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. So he begins to grab her by the hand and lift her up and say, little girl, I say to you, get up. It says 42, the girl got up at once and began to walk around. And she was 12 years old. Notice the overlap with the woman who was bleeding for 12 years, but it's different that the mother is separate because the mother's waiting at her house. It wasn't the woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. That was her mother, but there is some overlap of 12 and 12. Don't know why. But she was 12 years old, so Jesus lifts her up and professes over her to get up at that same time, seemingly healing her here. It says they were completely astonished at this. He strictly ordered, verse 43, that no one should know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So Jesus kicks everyone out. No one is with faith, seemingly. Jesus takes that small group of faithful people that seemingly did have faith, and he allows them to witness this miracle. He heals this little girl, and she's healed and regaining her strength. He then, tells them to give her something to eat. And then he tells them in verse 43 that no one should know about this. And I think that's interesting because, as we've repeatedly stated, Jesus is trying to conceal his identity so that he is not put to death before his time. He has come for a mission to die on behalf of the whole world's sins, but not before his ministry work is done in the area, and not before many miraculous signs and miracles and teachings are given. And so Jesus, not wanting to be put to death that same day, he's trying to keep things secret. And so he tells everyone to keep it to themselves after this crazy miracle of him raising this girl seemingly back from the dead, which is what took place. And so awesome chapter. Jesus is the prophesied one who has power over demons and is waging war spiritually. He has power over disease and is healing physical ailments of both young and old, of every type and kind. And so keep this in mind. Think on these things. Meditate on these things. Think about what we learn with Jesus and his interaction with a demon-possessed man and 2,000 pigs, and how he values human beings. And see also that Jesus is the great physician. Where doctors can't heal, Jesus can. And while sometimes healing takes place here on earth, or sometimes it'll take place in the resurrection, every person who puts their faith and trust in Jesus is ultimately healed, whether in this life or in the next. And so that should give us great hope to trust in him as the great physician. And so I hope this chapter has been encouraging to you, challenging to you. If there's anything you have questions about, you didn't understand, or you'd like to clarify, please leave me a comment down below in the comment section. I'd love to get to that as I'm able. And I hope you can jump in with us for Mark chapter 6.